they'll hear a story about how St. John Paul II, as little Lolek, was the goalie in the soccer. So they go out to recess, and that little boy who's the goalie is going to feel like St. John Paul II, Lolek. They just love those stories.
Welcome to Raising Grace. I'm so happy to have with us today. You notice there's two other sisters, and I think the last time, a couple of episodes ago, when Dr. Villa and I were here together, we had Mother Ma Veritas and Sister Thomas Aquinas. So as we said from the beginning, we're going to bring in, well, obviously they're my colleagues, okay, my religious sisters in community. But actually, why don't you introduce yourselves first? Yeah.
Sure. I'm Sister Mary Bethany, and I entered the community 10 years ago, and it's been my joy to teach the younger grades, kindergarten, first and second.
I'm Sister Maria Karol. I've been in the community 13 years, and I also have taught first and second grade.
So if
welcome.
I know.
Good to have you guys.
So if you're listening carefully, you can hear that these are two of our experts, right, in the primary education. And so Dr. Villa and I have been talking about virtue education, the theological virtues, the introduction to the cardinal virtues. And so what I thought would be really wonderful if you all could kind of give us a look into your mind of what it means to be a primary teacher, but really how you use the virtue materials, the resources of Disciple of Christ Education and Virtue in your classroom, and teaching in particular to this age group. Because as we're having these shows, Dr. Villa and I are unpacking the timeline, the Raising Grace developmental timeline, the beauty of gradualness. So as you've been able to see, we're going very, very slowly through all of this.
Very good. Yeah.
So what the sisters had done is that they sat together, they had a little fireside chat with one another, and we'd like for you to see that, and then we'll talk about that a little bit on the other side of the video.
Sister, it is so good to sit down to chat with you today about teaching the virtues to the lower elementary students. And remind me again, what grades you've been teaching most recently?
First and second grade.
Okay, and I've been teaching kindergarten, and I think one of the things that we have just been chatting about is the importance at this age of setting the classroom environment. At the early ages especially, it's not so much the content, it's really you're educating the whole child, bringing them into the life of school, how it looks to, operate in a group, how to learn at your desk. So, sisters, sort of to start us off, what are some ways that you've used education and virtue to sort of set that classroom environment and culture?
I have used the virtues, the cards especially, to display, and when I talk about classroom expectations, I'll post my expectations, usually try to keep them to 3 to 5, less is more, but I'll say, this is what it looks like to help each other grow in virtue, or this is what it looks like to sit and listen when others are talking, and show them the virtue card, put it up next to the classroom expectation. So when they need reminders of, how do we act in our room? How do we help each other grow in virtue? You can point to the classroom expectation and they can see a picture of what it looks like to hold their body on the carpet. I also love to put pictures of the saints up around so that everywhere they look, they can see examples and models of holiness. And so using the virtue cards, giving them the visual. I also like to put them on their desk, so that if they need help or a reminder, or I'm saying you're doing a wonderful job showing patience during this work time, giving them something concrete to look at, to hold, to touch.
Because we are body and soul. So I think something about the virtue curriculum is that we know that children learn through all of their senses. They need, especially the youngest learners, they need those hands-on, tangible signs. And so the color coding and the beautiful images and the prayer and the words for those emerging readers, it's all of it, and we're able to surround them with it. So I love that. I love that you use it everywhere. I do the same. And one thing I've also loved about this with the early learners is they're so absorbent, and so you can really introduce so many new words. So building that vocabulary, building that language of virtue as one of the foundations of a classroom culture. So I don't know, Sister, if you've ever done this, but I think even just taking one virtue a week and just using that to be the focus virtue and to be able to teach in all the different, today is self-control. I always start the year with that one.
Yes.
That's like right off the bat, that's so practical. You need that self-control right away. But who will show me the virtue of self-control in the hallway? Who is showing me the virtue of self-control by sitting quietly at their desk? So you're really reinforcing those expectations, but now you're anchoring it to a virtue. And what's so beautiful about that is you're giving the children this opportunity not just to obey and form that school habit of behavior, but really to choose the good.
Yes.
When you tie it to the virtue. And to see it as part of this is what the saints have done. This is how you are becoming a saint right now as a student.
Yes. They want to be good. They desire so much, that innate desire to be good. And so when you remind them of that, it really gives them courage and an extra desire, to, of course, they always want to please their teacher when they're that young, but also they want to be reminded that they are wanting to do what is good. And I think one thing that's really key, especially in the younger grades, is pointing out when you see it. That positive reinforcement is very key. And so the teacher will do that too. So thank you so much for showing self-control as we waited in line for our class to be done with our bathroom break.
Yes.
But then also giving them kind of the mission of finding self-control.
Yes.
Did anyone see a friend show self-control in line? Or I'm looking, like you said, I'm looking for someone who can show self-control as we walk to the chapel.
Yeah.
But then, you have to remember, but circling back, did anyone see, and as they raise their hand and they say, I saw Lucy show self-control, thank you, Lucy, acknowledging that.
We're reinforcing it constantly throughout the day.
Yes, and giving them the opportunity to see it in each other too.
Yes.
Because they love to be recognized themselves.
Yes.
And so part of that, encouraging humility, recognizing the gift in somebody else, and when someone comes up to me and says, as you're instilling this habit of finding the good in other people too, not just in themselves, but say, oh, that was so humble of you to notice that your friend was quiet in the bathroom.
Because there's a virtue really operating in almost anything. So for me, it was a mental shift as I started teaching, but also so beautiful because then it wasn't just that I was managing behaviors, but I could actually see the good of the child in front of me. And that just led to this more contemplative, being able to really affirm how the Holy Spirit was working in each one of them. And I think that's something also that the virtue curriculum, because it is supplemental. It is something that you can use according to the needs of your class as a whole, but then also for each individual student. So, industriousness might be the virtue card that I give to this particular student, either because he really excels in it already or perhaps because she really needs to grow in that virtue. And I think maybe, Sister, could you share a little bit, especially with classroom management?
Yes.
I think we've sort of touched on that whole group with how we tie our classroom expectations to virtues, and we use that just in our general vocabulary. But with specific students, how you found the virtue language and the virtue curriculum to be so life-giving.
Yes. One thing that I've noticed, the little ones love that individual attention, and they really crave that.
Everyone.
And it's one of those things, it's hard as a teacher, you feel your finitude, that you can't give them all the attention you want, but just a slight little check-in, you are showing such magnificence. You are doing your very best on this picture. Or I could tell that you used your best handwriting. What a great gift that you're giving. You're using your talents for good.
Yes. Which is so different from saying, good job.
Yes.
That generic blanket, praise and affirmation has a place, but to be able to really just speak the truth of the virtue, it raises it to another level.
Yes, and it's kind of something, is kind of a mindset change for a teacher. But yes, maybe making the resolution, instead of saying good job, I'm going to say thank you so much for showing the virtue of.
Yes.
And then you're training them, and they're listening and they're hearing it.
Yes. And I know teachers who even make themselves little flashcards of common virtues they may see. Like if the virtues are new, even and you're trying to intentionally incorporate them into your vocabulary, they'll say like, being quiet in line, and then they'll say docility, or self-control. So almost like little prompts and cues, and they'll just leave those like a little ring of cards on their desk to help them also know, oh, that's perseverance. Yes, that's,
Yes. So, and then this is again whole group. Individual is also something to discuss, but whole group too is sometimes, we'll have a assembly, or we'll have the principal address the school and give reminders on behaviors. Mm-hmm. And so what I found myself doing is, as he's giving the reminders, whether it's on a Teams call or he's on a video call, like for the classroom to give morning announcements, even morning announcements, I will ruffle through the virtue box and I will pull out the behaviors he's looking for. He's kind of asking all of the school to, to practice, and I will put them up on the board.
And then the virtue cards then are such a helpful, the looks like and the sounds like. Speaking about the different ways children learn, they need the practical examples. Yes. They can't just hear about it in the abstract. And I love even just the virtue cards with the children's drawings on them. Yes. There's something so appealing and just immediately relevant to all of those different scenarios. Like, this is what magnificence looks like in this situation, and at home, and at school, and on the playground, which is such a helpful tie-in.
Yes.
So, sister, we talked a little bit about how the virtues can really shape the whole group classroom environment and those expectations, but they also are so helpful in dealing with those individual students, especially those students who at this age are just learning how to regulate, how to be in school, how to deal with those big emotions. So what are some ways that you found the virtues really help out with that?
First, letting them say what they're feeling. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now? And they can say, I'm feeling angry. And then I say, thank you so much for telling me.
To name the emotion.
Yes, thank you for telling me that. I'm so glad that you told me you're feeling angry. So let's try this. Why don't you go to the prayer corner and ask Jesus to help you, and giving them permission to take a break. Yes. I mean, I've had a student who I sent out in the hallway to go and visit a statue and then come right back in.
Just that, it shifts the brain.
It shifts the brain because they're stuck in how they're feeling, and they need to know what they're feeling is okay, but they have choices on how they want to act it out. So, maybe saying, I want you to take this card of meekness, and I want you to go visit the Blessed Mother statue and look at her and say, Mama Mary, help me. And then you can come back and we'll try again.
So you're equipping them with those tools, because that's what's so beautiful about our faith, is that we are body and soul. We are all, like the whole child, like mental, social, emotional, spiritual. Like we want to shape the whole person. And that's what holiness really is. It starts with that integration and wholeness.
Yes.
And I think that's what's so beautiful, is to realize, like, yes, you're feeling these things, but you also have the power, you have the will, the free will to choose how you're going to respond. And
and God will help you.
Yes,
He'll help
and give them the tools. You're not alone in this. You don't just need to have these like natural, like human level coping strategies. You also can reach out for grace and that prayer, that leading into prayer, which is also calming. So it's it's both. It's that like it's calming the body and it's calming the mind, but it's also giving them those spiritual helps that they need in those situations where virtue is called for.
Yes.
Sister, we could probably keep talking about the virtues and social emotional learning all day, but thank you for sharing some of the ways that you have used the virtues to set your classroom environment and use the language of virtue to build up the whole class, and then also individually with those students who may need the additional support.
Well, thank you, sisters, for that window into the latency age child, those primary school years. It was so cool to see you guys talk about how you use virtue in the daily, where the rubber meets the road. And you really get an idea that virtue education is Catholic social emotional learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love, sister, is so much, we talk about this, that we're made for wholeness, that we're body and soul. And you really brought that out, both of you, in your conversation. And I think what I thought was really beautiful was that the sensitivity that you have of that understanding, of this integration. And a few episodes back, Mother Maria Veritas gave us a great teaching on the Christian anthropology, and how we're created in God's image and likeness. We're male and female. We're made for communion. And that really came out. I felt that. I'm sure the audience felt it too. I bet you were thinking, oh, I wish my children were in the classes with the sisters,
Yes, Exactly.
And I don't know, Dr. Villa, as you were listening, and you kind of understand the neuroscience behind all that they're doing. Maybe you could share that with the audience, and then perhaps, as what Sister Mary Bethany said, sometimes as teachers we get intimidated and we're thinking, there's no way I can do this, but it's natural, isn't it?
Yeah.
Such good instincts.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I really loved how you did ground your work with your children in just the dignity of the child, and that they can turn to God for grace and help with daily struggles. So that was really beautiful. So Sister Mary Bethany and Sister Maria Karol were talking about the latency age child, and latency is that time between that first window of neurological organization and the second. So it's kind of a quiet time when they are doing a lot of skill building, so it's important to be introduced to the language. And these are the children early on in their school years who are learning the brain fundamentals of balance and resilience, and the cardinal virtues that match those of temperance and fortitude. So when you talked about self-control, it's so central for children who are entering into the school years to learn that virtue, to help them with their self-management. And it's beautiful how you talked about it and how you use the virtue cards to draw attention to building that skill. And then the second one is fortitude and resilience. When a student is experiencing frustration, they really need to know how to manage that and to bounce back from it. So you guys did a beautiful job.
And to build on what Sister Dominic said, it's so amazing to hear the neuroscience behind these things. But I think as a teacher, if you're attentive to the children and you're responding to their needs, you're already doing it. So the virtues, I've just been amazed since I've started teaching with the virtues how naturally it actually flows. So the cardinal virtues, the temperance virtues and the fortitude virtues, those are the areas of need that the children need. Those are the behaviors we're already trying to ingrain in them. So then to be able to bring in the human anthropology even of teaching them, you have a mind, you can know what is true, you have a will, you can choose what is good, and just integrating the person, it is just that little extra boost of the language to what you're already doing and what you're already saying and how you're already structuring your classroom for your children.
Exactly, and I think if you think about the earlier shows, we've been talking a lot about, and we've talked about this, community, about this understanding of like the still point of grace, which we oftentimes think about just kind of putting ourselves in God's presence and encouraging, you as teachers and parents, that if you kind of live in that mindset, then you're able to be more relational. And like you said, so it's not like you have to go buy a textbook this big to figure out how to do it.
Neuroscience. It's so instinctual in many ways. And it was such a joy to see how you guys use the virtue cards to bring the presence of Christ into the classroom in a moment-by-moment daily way.
And that's what we call neuroplasticity. So
co-regulation.
Co-regulation.
Yeah, what was apparent was that you were building these skills gradually, day by day, moment by moment, over time. And that is how those neurons build those connections and how you wire in this goodness over time. And it is a very gradual process. But it's a joy to do it day to day, truly. Moment to moment.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about, we think about the truth, beauty, and goodness, right? So as Dominicans, we talk a lot about veritas, which is truth, with the intellect and the this understanding that with good is goodness is the will moving towards that, and just the beauty of the person when they're living this integrated, life, that you're really pulling that out and you're showing that, and again, that's like a transcendental. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, those are like lofty ideas, but it's really beautiful that just in your interaction that I can.
And the children really respond to that. It's kind of imperceptible, but using that language, there's just this peace and this just the classroom atmosphere changes.
It does.
And I think it starts with me, you know,
yeah.
there's a harmony, but I think also just me being able to live more prayerfully and, you know, pray for specific students and specific situations and the virtues I need to be able to respond to them.
Right. And all these wonderful tools for neuroscience for the students is also for the teachers. You know, when you're managing a classroom and you're realizing, you know, I need to calm myself as well.
We're learning with them.
And they love that. But when the teacher starts to kind of get a sense of tapping into that innate goodness and drawing it out, you tend to just crave it even more.
That's right. So So when we put on our habits in the morning, right? We still have emotions and feelings behind us, right? Okay. So when you may feel that, you may see, you know, one of the sisters running to the statue or the chapel saying that prayer, right? So we're all doing this, and parents, it's the same thing. You know,
And it's good for the students to also see that you're striving too.
Yeah, right.
They need to see that. And so one thing that I'll do is I'll look at the cross, you know, in the classroom. I'll say, Jesus, give me patience right now, out loud, you know, so that they realize, you know, sister needs a little break as well.
That's wonderful.
Now, one thing you talked about too is you both talked about it was with the saint cards and just kind of creating that cloud of witnesses for the children. I mean, can you talk maybe a little bit more about you know, bringing that in? I mean, because you know they have this imagination. I can remember this one priest at Mass. He came and offered Mass for the children. He said, if you could stop and imagine that right now this chapel is filled with myriads and myriads and myriads of angels, you know. But I mean, how do you talk about that? You know,
Children love stories.
Right. Okay.
And when you tell them stories about the life of a saint, and then even the education virtue, like every virtue has a saint story that goes with it, and they latch onto that. And so, you know, they'll hear a story about how St. John Paul II, as little Lolek, was the goalie in the soccer. So they go out to recess, and that little boy who's the goalie is going to feel like St. John Paul II, Lolek. They just love those stories. So they look around and you point out, today is the feast of so-and-so, the St. John Bosco. Look, there's his picture. And to remind them that you have friends in heaven who are praying for you and who love you. They need to know that.
Yeah, the reality of not being alone. And, you know, the latency age is very much a time of socialization as well.
Sure is. You're right.
And so they're learning with their peers. They're also learning that they're part of the family of God. And so they have these struggles, they're striving, but then the saints have experienced those same things and are also, you know, those stories have such appeal because they're true stories. And what a wealth we have to draw on, not just to hold up as examples, but also as intercessors for the students and for the teachers, for us, for the parents, for all of us.
You see how virtue creates that holding environment that you and I have talked about before, where children are held in this fertile ground of love and relationship where they are learning about Christ's presence for them. So I think the virtue education creates that surround, and we really need that.
And then and you all have the beautiful, you know, responsibility, or the privilege, I should say, of preparing them, you know, for the sacraments. And we talked about the importance of the, you know, well, this is raised in grace, right? So we want them to understand the beauty of living in God's habitual grace, but just this understanding of the living the sacramental life, or preparing them for that. That's, I don't know if you want to share a few thoughts on that.
Even with the virtues, you know, God gives the growth. So it's not just a self-perfection, you know, we're always showing them, like, pray for this. Let's pray together for this virtue. Let's ask the Lord for help. And I think just during that time of sacramental prep, it's awe-inspiring when you sort of prepare the children to see how the Holy Spirit is at work in them. At this age, you know, it is such fertile ground. They are so open to hearing the voice of God. Hopefully they just have been surrounded by this experience of love, and so they're able to respond very deeply to the love that they've received, and then just guiding them further into that through, you know, those actual encounters with Christ in the sacraments.
And what I loved about your discussion is how you used virtue for feedback during that time of learning to have, you know, observe your own behavior and what you would do differently, come into that examination of conscience. So feedback is so different than praise for this age. So praise ends up feeling inauthentic and like they're trying to please somebody rather than they're coming into a knowing of themselves, body and soul, in the midst of their
and
relationship.
mistakes are okay. That's
Mistakes
like
are
the
okay.
mercy of God,
Yes.
that confession, that experience of we all fall on the way, and that's fine, you know.
Right.
And we talked about that with Mother and Sister Thomas Aquinas, and we talked about just the beauty of living from the Father's love, living from the Trinity. And I think when you're emphasizing the feedback as far as the praise, that's another way that you can do that, is that
That's a beautiful connection.
you're recognizing
That's
the
right.
dignity of who they are. And I think both of you have expressed that so well. You know,
Yes.
you're just, as you said, you're seeing God, you know, God's the one that gives the growth, and you're
Right.
recognizing that in your life of grace, these virtues are God's giving growth to that, and you're becoming the person God's created you to be. He's created us male and female, you know.
Yes.
And we're partners. I think as teachers we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves, like to do it right. But I think part of knowing that these children are God's beloved children, He is their Father, and He is providing through you as the teacher, and that gives you a lot of freedom and joy in just, you know, embracing the opportunities, but also relying on Him to really guide you in for each child.
You're going to say something?
Oh, yes. Well, so especially when preparing for the sacraments, you know, you teach them how to examine your conscience. The virtues come into that very integrally. They just kind of set right in.
Bet they do.
Especially when you're teaching the 10 Commandments, you want to train them like to live in full freedom. It's not just don't do this and don't do this because it's bad. It's you are made to live like Jesus, and this is how you live like Jesus. And so as you examine your conscience, those virtue, the language of the virtue comes into play. But also with the sacraments, you teach them what are the effects of Holy Communion, what are the effects of the sacrament of reconciliation. You are strengthened.
Right.
You are strengthened, and they love that. They love to know about the armor of God.
Right.
You know, like they're strengthened. You
That's
know,
right. And
you
fortitude
teach
is such
them.
a strong virtue with that.
Yes, and you
Yeah.
receive the
Yeah.
grace strengthens you so that when you're in that situation again, you know, God's help is equipping you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And they're moving from self-management to self-awareness, right?
Yes.
And that
Yes.
self-awareness is embedded with the love that you guys have shared with them and taught them about.
Well,
Beautiful.
thank you both so much. I mean, we're
I should
running out of
say.
time here. Okay, so hopefully this has really given you just that concrete, you know, application. I mean, I'm sure that you want to, again, the beautiful thing that the sisters bring to the classroom, just your presence and all that you do for the children. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for guiding us along the
You're
understanding
welcome,
of the
and God bless
timeline.
your work.
Yeah.
Thank you for it.
And thank you very much. And stick around for the next episode because we're going on up into high school next.